China has more than 50 suppliers out of Apple's more than 150 global suppliers, which involve thousands of companies and millions of upstream and downstream employees. Apple, as the top designer of an ecosystem, can change the fate of millions of workers in China with a single decision. Two opposing views have emerged on this issue. One is that Apple would be out of luck if it were to leave China. The other is that Apple and its largest foundry, Foxconn, have already said goodbye to China. What is the actual situation? How much have Apple and Foxconn scaled back their business in China? And how fast are they pulling out of China? In this episode, we will explore this topic with the help of data. It was midnight on June 9, 2023, and a tense atmosphere prevailed at Foxconn's Guanlan factory in Shenzhen. Hundreds of Special Forces police and armed police officers quickly deployed in the factory. The Guanlan area used to be Foxconn's factory in Shenzhen. Inside the large conference hall, several hundred Foxconn employees were gathered, and the doors of the hall were tightly blocked by armed police. On June 9th, Foxconn decided to lay off divisional employees in the ILVG department in Shenzhen. These employees earned about 10,000 RMB or US $1,385 per month and had served Foxconn for more than 10 years. Chinese labor law says that laid-off employees are entitled to 15 to 20 months of compensation, which should be at least 150,000 RMB or more than 20,000 US each. However, Foxconn never intended to pay this compensation voluntarily, but chose to move these employees to other positions, depriving them of bonuses and overtime pay and paying them only basic salaries. The employees felt that this was actually a disguised way of forcing them to leave their jobs, rather than being laid off. There was no compensation for quitting the job on one's own accord. This one-sided decision caused strong dissatisfaction among Foxconn employees. The employees felt that if the company wanted them to leave, they should be compensated with N+1. N means that the employer has to pay 1 month of salary for every year the employee has worked. The employees gathered at the factory to defend their rights, shouting N+1, and there were at least hundreds of protesters. In the end, Foxconn agreed to the employees' proposed N+1 severance package. Now it's like this at night. The commandos are here. The door is blocked. No more people are allowed in. It's the same here. All commandos, waiting for the big boss to fix it. They're bloody coming with guns. What's the situation? Solve it now. It's already midnight. It's 12:14 a.m. The employees shout, N1, 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 N1. The same thing happened 2 months ago. Foxconn forced employees to leave the company on their own through disguised layoffs. The employees got the N1 payouts after protesting. Why is Foxconn laying off employees so frequently? In recent years, Apple is gradually moving its industrial chain to India. As Apple's largest foundry, Foxconn is naturally part of this relocation plan. In addition, it's probably also related to the decline of global electronics consumption, and Apple moving part of its orders to other Chinese companies. This is the new factory area of Shenzhen Foxconn, Longhua District. It once had 150,000 employees, and now there may be less than 30,000. The once busy scene at its north gate is gone. What used to be bustling has turned into an empty scene now. Inside the dormitory building, many rooms are empty, especially the top floor, which is almost deserted. A little further ahead is the north side of Foxconn. You can see this street is now quiet and empty, without many people. News is spreading in China that the new Foxconn plant in Shenzhen is giving its employees a few months-long vacations during the off-season starting in March 2023. This is the dormitory area that used to host thousands of people. In just a few short months, it has become like this. People are gone and the buildings become empty. Look at this place. It used to have a lot of people living here, but now many stores are closed. Now, the drying laundry in the dormitory is no longer seen. People have left.
全部的好多人都走了。
As the most important foundry for Apple phones, Foxconn in Zhengzhou, Henan province once produced more than 50% of global iPhones and had nearly 90 production lines and over 300,000 employees. Foxconn not only brought job opportunities and tax revenue to Zhengzhou, but its import and export output value also accounted for almost 80% of Zhengzhou city's foreign trade, 70% of that of Henan province, and nearly 1/3 of the export value of the entire Chinese cell phone industry. In other words, Foxconn is extremely important to Henan province in terms of economic contribution. Now, with the relocation of Apple's industrial chain to Southeast Asia, Foxconn is following its lead. There is constant news of its investment in India and Vietnam to build factories. In March, there was news on the Chinese web that Zhengzhou Foxconn would no longer recruit workers due to reduced orders, and it would lay off more than 10,000 employees. The empty factory area looks deserted, and few people can be seen. Many surrounding shops are closed, and the employee dormitory area is also empty. Look at this. Foxconn hasn't left yet. It hasn't moved away yet, but the businesses have all become like this. If it really moves away, how can the business still run? Foxconn mustn't move.
这边是富士康 K 区门口。
This is the entrance to the Foxconn K area. It's the Foxconn commercial street, the entrance of K area. There isn't much business, not much business. Many stores are closed. Many apartments aren't rented out. No one rents them. It used to have all sorts of food stalls. If Foxconn really moves to India and Vietnam, all these businesses can just go home. Half of them are closed, including supermarkets and so on. This is the dormitory area. Not many employees here. Not many people in this dormitory area. These stores are all closed. Not one is open. Internet cafes are closed too. They used to be super busy when business was good. Can you imagine? This is Foxconn at 7 a.m. when people go to work. Compared to the peak time, there were far fewer people. After Foxconn entered the low season, people were basically all gone. This is the pedestrian street, the entrance. Businesses used to be good in this place, but now they are all for lease. And several stores in this area are for lease. Now, the entire place sees no people. It's empty. We should know that at 7:22 in the morning is the peak of Foxconn commuting. In the past, it was very crowded. Even if you didn't buy anything, many people were passing by, but now you see it's empty. This area can be considered the most prosperous in Foxconn. Look at it now. Foxconn's headquarters are in Taiwan, known as Taiwan Hanhai Precision Group. Foxconn has been developing in mainland China for decades and has a total of 44 factories across China. Chinese media reports that by 2019, Foxconn had about 1.2 million employees in China. In October 2022, a massive epidemic broke out at Foxconn in Zhengzhou. Many workers, upset by the epidemic prevention measures in the factory and fearing infection, staged a mass exodus on foot that shocked the world. The chaos exposed vulnerabilities in Apple's supply chain and forced it to lower its production forecast. During the traditionally brisk Christmas season, iPhone shipments were about 78 million units, with a shortfall of about 6 million units. Chinese media reported that Apple's adjustments included shifting some of the orders that originally belonged to Foxconn to other Chinese companies. Henan province, a not-so-rich province, was the hardest hit. Exports from Foxconn and Zhengzhou account for 70% of exports from Henan province, which ranks 5th nationwide in terms of GDP. Foxconn's exports in the mainland ranked 1st, accounting for 4% of GDP. The annual export value of Foxconn is more than US $30 billion, ranking 1st in China. It once employed more than 300,000 people in its factories, and now it is like this. The whole port area, the whole of Zhengzhou, and even the whole of Henan has been hit hard. I believe that many people understand. If Foxconn really moves out, the economy of Zhengzhou and even the economy of Henan will go straight down. Countless businesses in the surrounding area will collapse. The Zhengzhou Airport economy zone will go back to the time when no one cared about it, and the employment rate in Henan province will fall straight down. From Foxconn to Zhengzhou, how many people got rich because of it, and how many people will be at a loss when it leaves? Apple has also been in China for 30 years, spending billions of dollars to build a complex supply chain ecosystem. Apple CEO Tim Cook emphasized during his visit to China earlier this year in April that Apple enjoys an interdependent relationship with China. However, Apple is under tremendous pressure from investors and the US government to decouple from China and to accelerate its supply chain diversification. The facts suggest that Apple has already started to act. Willingly or unwillingly, Foxconn, Apple's largest contract manufacturer, has to adjust to Apple's pace. Pegatron Technology is the second largest Apple foundry after Foxconn. It's also Apple's largest foundry in Shanghai. It employed more than 80,000 people at its peak and now has about 70,000 employees. In the 2021 list of top 100 foreign invested enterprises in Shanghai, Pegatron Technology ranks second on the list in total import and export. According to Chinese media reports, Pegatron has stopped recruiting since November 2022, and some employees are now leaving. Pegatron Shanghai has a large number of employees from Henan province, many of whom have worked in Zhengzhou Foxconn. Several Shanghai Pegatron employees from Henan who were interviewed said that Pegatron stopped recruiting. It should be related to Apple's cancellation of orders. In addition, according to Reuters, Pegatron's parent company, Pegatron Technology, intends to open a second factory in India in order to continue to diversify investment and production operations outside China. Thousands of Chinese companies are involved in the industrial chain of Apple Incorporated in the US. According to Wind Data, in the 10 years from 2012 to 2022, 12 Chinese A-share listed companies and companies in the Apple industry chain have achieved rapid growth in annual operating income and net profit attributable to their parents. In terms of annual revenue, the total revenue of the 12 listed companies has increased from approximately US $4.7 billion in 2012 to US $82.2 billion in 2022. With a growth rate of well over 1,600%. The total net profit attributable to the parent company of the 12 listed companies increased from US $450 million to approximately US $3.8 billion, a growth rate of 733.5%. Apple has helped its industrial chain companies to fly, and also made these enterprises in China develop a serious Apple-dependent syndrome. Once Apple cuts orders or moves the industry chain, these companies can be hit hard. For example, Shenzhen-based Luxshare Precision industry company is known as the #1 supplier in the Apple chain among mainland companies, mainly making AirPod headphones for Apple. 74% of the company's revenue came from Apple in 2021. Its high dependence on Apple has greatly increased its business risk. In January, the Chinese media reported that Luxshare Precision's current market value shrunk by more than 250 billion yuan, or US $34.5 billion, compared to 2020 due to Apple's cutbacks. It is possible that all this is just the beginning, and hard times are still ahead for Luxshare Precision. Known for its designed in America, made in China model, Apple has turned to Chinese vendor Luxshare Precision to help design their augmented reality AR-related products. AR is actually one of Apple's newest high-end products, a partnership that reflects Apple's reliance on Chinese suppliers and its rising position in the manufacturing industry. The Financial Times reported in January that Chinese supply chain produces $316 billion worth of Apple's products each year. For the past 15 years, Apple has been sending its top product designers and manufacturing design engineers to China to spend months at a time in the factories of Apple's suppliers. The report reads, Apple is building a supply and production system that is incredibly complex, deep, and costly, so much so that Apple's own destiny has become tied to China in a way that is difficult to untie. However, in recent years, Apple has been shifting suppliers under the US-China confrontation. This is because, as mentioned earlier, there have been shortages and disruptions in the global supply chain due to China's anti-epidemic measures. It's a warning to multinational companies that they need to consider diversifying their supply chains to reduce the pressure of supply disruptions in a single region. For Apple, which is a risk-averse company, an overly concentrated supply chain isn't a good thing. The more important point that Americans cannot ignore than the short-term risk of an epidemic is that America's most valuable brand is being held hostage by the CCP. As such, Apple is now at the center of geopolitical tensions. In the context of the US-China confrontation and supply chain restructuring, the biggest gaining country is by far India. However, India, which is regarded as the next big manufacturing country, is more difficult than expected. On the one hand, there are still big gaps in India's workers, infrastructure, and regulations, making it impractical to effectively transfer high-end products. On the other hand, some Indian regulations restrict the ability of buyers or investors, including China, to acquire or invest in certain Indian companies. This means that if Apple is to move toward a more aggressive de-Sinicization, it must first address the complex regulatory issues in India. The Financial Times reports that according to data from Counterpoint Research, India currently accounts for only about 5% of iPhone production. Since 2017, Apple has been producing low-end iPhones in India. The high-end flagship iPhone production only started in India since the iPhone 14 series in the fall of 2022. JP Morgan Chase projects that India could account for a quarter of total iPhone production by 2025, far exceeding the current 5% level. In the Financial Times report, a former Apple engineer said that Apple has actually been moving some of its operations outside of China since 2014, but progress has only been slow. Apple needs to find ways to automate production to overcome rising labor costs. Apple announced the 2022 Apple supplier list, and the total number of Chinese companies decreased to 49. Compared with the previous year, the number of suppliers decreased by 3. It is a clear sign of de-Sinicization. In addition, among the 186 suppliers on the list, the number of Taiwanese suppliers is 45, the same as last year. From 2018 to 2021, the number of factories outside of China in Apple's supply chain is growing at a much faster rate, suggesting that Apple's Chinese suppliers are expanding their overseas production capacity. Bloomberg Industry Research notes that given that Apple may have started its decoupling plan 3 years ago, Apple's share of supplier factories in China could fall to below 30% by the end of 2024. From 42% in 2020 and 35% in 2021, based on Apple's supplier list. Based on the report mentioned above, we can conclude that compared to the pre-epidemic period, Apple has pulled out of China by about 10%. The problem, however, is that not only Apple but also other prominent American brands are putting pressure on their suppliers currently dependent on Chinese factories to explore the possibility of moving production lines to countries like India and Vietnam. The withdrawal of even small parts of some big factories like Apple and Foxconn has affected many upstream and downstream companies significantly. These Chinese companies will either follow these large factories to build factories in Southeast Asian countries too, or go bankrupt and close down. Thus, the ones who suffer the most are the wage earners who lost their jobs. Cities such as Shenzhen, Guangzhou, Shanghai, and Beijing have seen a wave of migrant workers returning to their hometowns, which is still happening. There are still some hardcore wage earners in Shenzhen who end up taking shelter on the streets, under the eaves, and in the tunnels due to a lack of income.
Shenzhen have a walk in the street. There are anxious people everywhere because they can't find jobs, okay? Crowds of people don't necessarily mean prosperity. Rather, they are all very anxious because there's no work. No work means a lot of problems, right? Think about it. Big companies are now continuing to lay off employees. Layoffs. For medium-sized enterprises, if you're 35 years old or older, you're on your own. They won't hire you, so don't even think about it. Small businesses, small enterprises are even worse. The bosses can hardly save themselves. They're simply paralyzed and closed down, so they won't hire, right? Now people come here because they can't find jobs and are all worried. So the streets are full with such people. There are swarms of people, but in reality, everyone is very anxious. This is the current state in Guangdong.
Now, in Shenzhen, there are too many young people who sleep on the streets because they can't find a job. Every night, the police are mobilized to collect these people to free accommodation for 2 days, and then they will find ways to get rid of them to their hometowns. The arrest teams of Big Brother are out, starting the so-called cleanup. The streets are being washed. Even the emergency vehicles are out. These people can stay for free. So many people. I see, they have to register their ID cards. These brothers are going to take the challenge of trying the free lodging place.